Hey everyone, welcome back to the latest word on Black News. I'm your host, Brittany Jones. So good to be back here with you folks. Today we're talking about something super important. April is National Sexual Assault Awareness and Prevention Month. And today we're focusing on protecting our community's most vulnerable. We're talking about our children, folks. According to RAINN, a nonprofit that supports survivors of sexual violence, every 68 seconds an American is sexually assaulted. And every 9 seconds, sadly, that victim is a child. Dr. Linda Holloway is helping families navigate this sensitive topic through her book titled Little Miss Linda Speaks Out About Rape.
A message for rape survivors. Rape is not something you ask for. Rape is something which has been taken from you and cannot be regained. The pain of rape is deep. It swallows your soul, leaving the survivor feeling helpless and out of control.
Well, Dr. Holloway is joining us now. Thanks so much for being here with us on the latest word on Black News. We're so excited to have you with us.
And I'm excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me. It's a great joy.
Yes, and thank you for the work that you are doing. And we know that this is obviously a very sensitive topic to discuss. So first, tell us why this month. Why is it so important to raise awareness about Sexual Assault Month?
Particularly for this month, this is Sexual Assault Awareness Month. So obviously, you want to raise the awareness during this particular month so that we can get the word out about what it means to be raped. And oftentimes, rape is a very difficult topic to talk about. So sometimes people use sexual violence, sexual abuse, but I really want to just zero in on rape. So that's why it's extremely important. And when you think about Black women, and in terms of looking at Black women in slavery, it's kind of like our bodies have never been our own. So you start to hear these stories, and these were stories about young women. They were not adults that was brutally raped. So it's important that we have this conversation from a historical perspective, from a psychological perspective, sociological perspective, so we can get the word out that rape is real and it happens.
Yeah, and it's not something easy to deal with. And as a matter of fact, it's a lot of times why people kind of keep it to themselves. And there is a silence around it when you talk about child sexual abuse in the Black community specifically. So tell us what inspired you to even write this book.
Well, I actually was doing some articles, and I wrote an article on shattering the myth around rape and what should you do after rape. Being a college professor and on college campuses, and also working in a university college counseling center, there were many students that would come and they would talk about it. But oftentimes, you would hear and doing the research about young children. And just thinking about, even when you reflect on Maya Angelou's story, she
Yeah.
was a young child. She was about 8 years old. You look at Oprah Winfrey, she was between the age of, and it varies depending on what you're reading, but that happens between 9 and 12. So all of these stories, I said, well, we got to have something to put in the hand of educators, people who are working with children, so that they can begin to have these conversations around this, because this is definitely happening at a very young age. And then I
Yeah.
stumbled upon this story called Celia the Slave. And it was a very heart-wrenching, breaking story. She was sold at 14. And from 14 to about 19, her slave owner raped her and abused her. She had children by him. And then she ended up killing him, like cutting him up, putting him in the fire. And of
Mm.
course, was hung. She went to trial. They tried to get her off. It was just a really horrific story. So you begin to unearth these stories about young Black girls that were fighting. So I said, oh my gosh, we got to have this conversation, have a book to put out, some literature to put out, so we can start early on to talk about it. And a lot of people did come after me because it's like the term rapist just seems really, really harsh. You use that, could you use something else? And I thought about, you really want to be able to say that so a child can begin to say that, so people
Right.
can, we can normalize this, because rape is one of those things, because it's a sexual act. Most of the time it get kind of confusing to people. And you can imagine a young child, not, they don't have the cognitive skills, they don't have the language skills to be able to deal with that. So all of that is a combination as to why I wanted to do the children book.
And you hit on something there. You said rape is real. Even if you don't want to use the word, it is what it actually is. And you have to be clear about that so that the kids do understand. So take us back to how you developed Miss Linda's story. Tell us a little bit about Miss Linda, little Miss Linda.
Little Miss Linda is actually my child voice that I actually use to tell various stories. And all of my books are called Little Miss Linda. So Little Miss Linda is actually telling this story about a situation where she comes home and she is home alone,
Mm,
and there's someone that comes in and that accident happens. So, and she blacks out. And that's another thing I do try to tell people, that it's not a really harsh book. It doesn't get into all of the detail or anything like that, because she blacks out. And then next thing she knows, she's pretty much at the hospital. Her mother's a nurse, so her mother tells her what happened. And
mm,
once she finds out what happened, she goes to therapy, and then she herself began to find out that this has happened to other young people to her age. And she started what she called the STAR program, which stands for Survivors Talking About Rape. And this particular STAR program, she just began to talk to other people about it. So that's the development of this particular book, and her actually going out. And one of the things I do, try to soften it up, because it is stars, and throughout my books, I try to make it as lighthearted and friendly, usable friendly. So there
right.
are stars throughout the book that the children get to try to locate, in reference to that. And I also have what I call LOLs in this book, and they're called learning out loud questions. So is the development of Little Miss Linda, talking about rape. This will be the first time I'm actually going public with this. I am a survivor of rape. And so
Wow.
it happened on a college campus. It was my first year when I
Mm,
was a professor. And so I had literally did come home from the dentist. So oftentimes people
wow.
ask me, are your stories true? They have elements of truth in them, but they're not, they do have base of fiction in them. So I am.
Wow.
So they have that part. I did go to the dentist that day. I did come home, and someone
Mm,
broke into the apartment, and I actually lived on campus. And one of the things I began to talk to campus administrators and things about at that particular time, we do focus on students, but they're also, we have to protect our faculty members. And it was quite challenging, because that was my first job, and here I
right.
am and having to go to work the next day. So I went through all the stages. So in actually developing the book, there's some real life things that actually occurred. So going to counseling, dealing with the struggles, and actually coming up with a program called STAR. So having survivors to talk about
Wow.
it. Oftentimes people would say there's a level of re-traumatization of having
Mm,
someone to tell their story, but there's also a level of I'm getting it out there. It's real. Because oftentimes when we think of rape, we think of someone, oh, what did you have on? What were you doing? So we have a perception of an individual who we think or say that this individual, put themselves in a position to be raped. So I didn't carry any of those things. But was I
mm,
asked
mm.
those questions? Yes. And so
Wow.
having to come from that place of realization, then I'm able to say, no, I was at home, and
Wow.
oftentimes people say, and it's true, a lot of people are raped by people that they know. And so that kind of information, they think, oh, this is somebody that you knew, but it may be somebody that you were familiar with, maybe someone that changed your tire when you went to
Cross
Walmart. Or,
paths.
yeah, but you don't know them. So obviously there are strangers out there that this does happen to. So I created this scenario, if you would. This story has elements of what I experienced, but in a childlike way.
Well,
And
let me tell you, first of all, God bless you, because just even hearing you share the story, and you're saying first you're I'm processing what you're saying, right? And you're publicly speaking about this. So many blessings to you. Just helping sharing your story is helping somebody else. And I can tell you, from a children's book author to a children's book author, I love how you did the same thing I have done with taking my story of tragedy and turning it into advocacy. And my story, I wrote about my late fiance, who I lost in the fire in the line of duty as a firefighter in Jacksonville, and now taking that story and turning pain into purpose, just as you have, and you being a survivor and sticking up for children and other women who are afraid to share their story. So just I wanted to address that, saying many blessings to you, and thank God that you decided to speak up because people need to be able to hear that. So my heart is with you when you said that, and turning it into a program and now helping people. So oh yeah, I'm just grateful that you said that and shared that with me and for everybody who's going to actually watch this. So how has that been received by educators and family members, and just you stepping out and sharing this story and people wanting to either buy the book or use the book as a resource to help other children and women who have experienced this?
Well, I would say this has been one of my least resistance books just because, there's shame and blame with it. So it
Yeah.
hasn't been received overall. And this is my first time actually sharing the story. So
Wow.
I don't normally share my story. Oftentimes I'm asked, people want to know what's we say elephant in the room. So I have not shared that story, but I actually went to a workshop earlier today and a
Mm-hmm.
young lady shared her story. So I thought, it's time. But I had been thinking about it, but I kind of wanted to wait till I retired because I didn't want my students to hear the story. And then when they see me, they kind of just relate that to that. And so then that becomes your story and it gets masked with everything else. And so I just thought it was most appropriate at this time. So ideally, I do not share the story. So I guess this was just in alignment with my God destiny tonight that I
Yes.
would share this story and
Mm.
that I will continue to be on the platform to share because I too, I guess, in some ways had some shame, but
Yeah.
not that I blame myself of anything like that, but I did
Right.
kind of go through that because the person, as far as we could tell, came through my bedroom window.
Mm.
And so I was thinking, man, so I became like, okay, next time I rent an apartment, I'm going to make sure that the windows are locked. And so I went through all of that. So those are the kinds of things that you kind of go through. And you actually do suffer from PTSD. Actually, people that you actually live with,
Right.
they actually become secondary victim. And hats off to my childhood best friend, Angela. It was immediately came there on the spot to the university that I was at. And then she too, just kind of walked me through it and to be there with me during those times. So I think it's important that if you are telling a story and you have experience, just like if someone had cancer, and they said, I am, the audience can now relate because they know that
Yes.
you are actually coming from a place. You're not talking about, okay, this happened to Oprah, this happened to Maya Angelou, but
Mm.
you're saying this has happened to me, but it happened to me as an adult. But like I said, I wanted to have something for younger children so they can. But I'm pretty sure I will definitely segue into talking about Black women and rape because I got very interested in. I love history and very
Yeah.
interested in taking a looking at the Black women during slavery who had to fight against this atrocity. And because
Mm.
they were not considered to be citizen or human, they did not own their body. They were slaves. So it's like, okay, there was no crime being committed. So you want to be the voice for the voiceless.
Mm.
So thank you for receiving it.
That is a word. You got to continue that. And and I'm interested in knowing, Dr. Holloway, what conversations has this brought about from children? Seeing your book, reading your book, do they feel empowered to be able to speak up in a way now?
The times that I have kind of talked about it, we talk about it from good touch, bad touch. No, it just depends on the age group because I kind of wrote all of my books where they could be talked to with younger children. So you're talking around 9, 10. So you still want to keep your language in such a way, um, and that is appropriate for them. So it's more about curiosity,
Mhm.
more about what do you mean when you say safe place? Would this person go to jail? Those kinds of things, questions that are asked. What if it's somebody, a relative, things like that. So you're mostly getting like questions because they're curious
Mhm.
and then just like, wow, this could, happen. So kind of like that. So it's really a very gentle kind
Yeah.
of conversation, but one of curiosity that I would say. Then when you start talking to adolescents, I kind of approach it from a relationship perspective and talking about if you're dating someone, if someone violates you. And so we talk about terms and what it means, because
Good.
sometimes even they think, well, I didn't see that as that. Or my friend told me that this happened to her, but they don't really have the language, or because this is somebody I like, this is somebody I know, I wouldn't consider them to have raped me. So I give them examples. Okay, you can have some money on you, and if someone steal that, they still stole it.
Yep.
They took it without your permission. So that
Mm.
would so they're taking something from you without your permission. And no, it means no if this is something that you're not comfortable with. And then just trying to identify who they feel that they can talk to. And sometimes they will say, I don't feel like I can talk to my mom. I said, well, is there anybody else in your circle that you feel that you can have this conversation with? So I do tell the story, and then I open it up and I said, let's just have a conversation. What do you tell me? What do you know about this topic? And then that kind of happens. Obviously, when you move on into a college level, that conversation becomes a little different, and they will talk about their experience. They will say things like, I had one young lady tell me about, and it was a football player. She said, I just didn't think that people would believe me. And because I went over to his room, and it was very heart wrenching because she ended up leaving school. And I
Mm.
wanted her, and I keep saying to them, it's not your fault, because you did that. But we tend to take on much of the blame. As far as men coming forward or young boys or something like that, I haven't. I try to keep it where I'm just talking to girls. I feel more comfortable with that, and I want a male to, and I want them to, because when you look at the sensitivity of part of rape, when
Yeah.
you even go in, even with same nurses, it's just really good if, and sometimes the police officer, when they do show up, if they are male, they say, okay, let me get you a woman, so they are trained, and sometimes you don't necessarily get that. Because when I went into the emergency room, there was a male doctor that was there. And so that's another story. But
Wow.
so those level of things become, so that most of the times people have like questions and stuff. So once again, I want to thank you for, inviting me and
Yeah.
creating a safe space so that I can share the story. And now this making me realize why I probably do need to have the microphone to
Yeah.
share my story, because now it brings up a lot of different things as to what other people might be experiencing. But I kind of
Yeah.
accepted that they.
And I wanted to go back to touch on that because you mentioned something that was very profound, and that's even being able to, you said you don't want your students to look at you a certain way because they're looking at this is Dr. Holloway. She's strong. She's teaching us this and that. And she's still very much that. And Dr. Holloway carries a fantastic, not fantastic, but carries a story that has so much weight, but also so helpful to where you don't know who's in the room who's going to benefit from that, and take your teaching career to the next level with being able to share that and speaking at conferences and all types of things that I think that will resonate with people to where you thought you couldn't share it, but it's going to open up so many more doors for you doing that. And not that I'm a therapist or anything, but I'm just
No.
I'm hearing your story, and that's what I see is that is so powerful. Dr. Holloway has a powerful story to be able to share with her students that makes them even receive what you're teaching on a different level. And one of the things I love is that, your book, Little Miss Linda, your books takes people on a journey. She's going to counseling, she's doing all these things that are really sometimes kind of touchy subjects in the Black community. So tell everyone a little bit more about the books that you have created and where they'll be able to find them.
Okay, the books that I've created, the first one was I Love My Happy Hair. It's about hair, and that's the one I pretty much take out to the schools. I'm in the process and still doing what I call an anti-hair bully campaign. So I have, for the last 2 years, given away 1,000 free books. And so there's social emotional learning just to teach people how to celebrate and love their hair. My
Mm.
second book deals with Little Miss Linda Goes to Counseling. And this is a young girl who actually deals with depression, and so she's trying to, encourage young people that it's okay to seek, counseling for what's going on with you. And then the third book deals with sickle cell. I had a really good friend who has sickle cell and has since transitioned. So she has a friend, Sally, who has sickle cell. So she is birthing into the world and bringing awareness to sickle cell, National Sickle Cell Day, which most people are not familiar with or know about. So June 19th, as well as September is Sickle Cell Awareness Month. And so then the next book deal with Little Miss Linda talks about rape, which we're here talking about today. I do have a copy of the book. I want to show it.
Wow.
And then the next book has to deal with Little Miss Linda talks about diversity. And this particular book actually addressed colorism. And she is a dark-skinned girl who travels around the world with her father. And like I said, elements of my life in there is true. My father was not, but I was in the military and spent 27 years. So she does, so I bring that element in there. And then the next book is Bad Girls of Montgomery. I love history. So when I was coming from Huntsville, Alabama to Montgomery, Alabama, I wanted to learn about the history. And so I began to unearth women that really you don't hear many people talk about, but lately they have. And so like Joanne Robinson, some people that were really foot soldiers. And so BAD stands for bold and determined. And it also gives the students an opportunity, young people, to talk about social justice, that you're never too young to be able to pick up something that you're passionate about and to do work around. And so that's where Bad Girls of Montgomery come from. And to let them know that no matter where they live in the world, there are some bad girls doing some wonderful, great things. And so then the sixth book actually deals with divorce. And it talks about a young, Little Miss Linda actually experiencing divorce. My parents were married for over 40 years, and then they got a divorce. Of course, I'm not talking about from an adult perspective, but from a young person perspective. And then the last one actually deals with death. And so then she's actually talking about how to cope with death. And her mother transitioned from cancer. So those are the 8 books that I have. There are 8 award-winning children books. So I am in the area of counseling, and all of the books that I have talked about are books that articles I wrote about. And so it allowed me to, as I'm writing these articles and researching, I'm saying there are young people who are actually dealing with these same issues. So how can I have a product that I can also deal with talking to, but I also wanted to be where I can be flexible enough that if I was talking to adolescents or I was talking to adults, and I found that big people or just little children, and they too like the stories. And stories is just a good way to kind of connect with children.
Mm-hmm. Wow. I mean, all of this work is just amazing. 8 book babies is what we call them.
Yes.
And they are reaching so many people with these are very real topics that each and every one of us have experienced in some shape or form, especially in our community. So kudos to you for being able to take that and then just making sure that these kids actually get to talk about what they experience. And Dr. Holloway, you just, dropped a bombshell on us today, but I'm so grateful to have shared this time with you and for you to be able to even share your story with us, and sending many blessings to you. And just thank you so much for joining us on the latest word on Black News.
Thank you so much for having me and for giving me the platform to be able to do it. I really, truly appreciate it. And I just want to say to any other survivors that are out there, if you've been holding your story, you've been carrying your story, at some point when you are ready and when you think that the time is meant for you to share your story, don't do it too prematurely. Don't do it because you think that's what you should be doing. If you want to tell the world and let them know, because your story would definitely help someone else.
Absolutely. Thanks again to Dr. Holloway for joining us and sharing her story, because it's so important, right? But we want you to know, if you happen to be struggling with sexual assault, there is a hotline for you to call, and that number is 1-800-656-4673. And remember that you do not have to go through this alone, folks. And we want to thank you for joining us for another episode of The Latest Word on Black News. Again, I'm your host, Brittany Jones. And until next time, take care.